So hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Hashtag Product Design podcast. As always, for those of you who don't know or couldn't guess by the title, this is a series of talks where I'll be picking the brains of industry experts, exploring different topics within product and design. I have the pleasure of finally being joined by Alex Dapunt. It's been a long time coming, this one, but I'm really excited about this one for sure. Today, we'll be exploring the topics of design within fintech and the importance of creating a seamless user experience and what it takes to build a great design team. Alex, again, pleasure having you on here, of course. Please, could you just give us a quick overview of your career so far?
Absolutely, Matt. It's a pleasure that we finally made it. I'm happy to be sitting here today. I think to really start at the beginning of my career, I was on my way to become an architect, but I failed. Right? So I was like, okay, mathematics, physics, and so on. That's all not for me. And I think that was when I started looking at, okay, what are other creative fields? Because for me, architecture was like this one thing. My dad is an interior designer, and I've always seen like furniture and colors and stuff. And I wanted to get into this creative field. And I think from there, it was like, okay, it's not going to be buildings and houses. And that's where I started like working initially in graphic design. I did a lot of editorial. I went to design school and always worked simultaneously. So my first job was in a very small studio where we've been working on editorial pieces, mostly for tourism. And I think while I was doing that, I was always interested also in this whole digital aspect. And I think back then it was still kind of earlier days, especially when it comes to, okay, what is product design, user experience, and so on. So I kind of taught myself some coding skills. I'm still a terrible coder. If you would check me on that, but that kind of landed me my first job in an agency. And the interesting thing was like I was web designer back then. But the agency was working with hotels a lot. I mean, I'm from the north of Italy, so tourism is like really big. And they did have some products. They had a CRM system, they had a booking software, and all these sort of things. So I think that was a little bit like my first touch point into actually, okay, there's a user using it. It's not just about like the prettiness of a website. And like being in contact with users and trying to optimize how this whole tool worked and finding the right flows for different kind of customer groups and segments, personas, if you would want to call them. And I think that was the start. And from there on, I went through a couple of like different companies. I moved to Germany, initially Munich, then to Berlin. And then popped up, and it was like, I mean, we're going to talk about the fintech companies. So
of course,
that was like where I first kind of got in contact with this whole fintech word. And I started there initially as an IC, but the company started growing quite quickly. I think like just between me signing the contract and actually joining the company, we went from 70 people to like almost 200 because of an acquisition. And that was a really good opportunity for me also to then go more and more into the leadership role. I mean, I did lead a smaller team already before, but like really talking about
it was a new level, wasn't it?
Juniors over the time. But some have really changed this. So I had the chance to like be heading their design team for 4 years. We hired probably 60, 70 designers in the time. I mean, when I left, we were like 40, between 40 and 50 people in the organization across like Europe and South America. And then after sum up, I did a short kind of segue into consulting. So I was working for Bain & Company. Also there, because of my background, I was mostly focused on fintech companies. So I was interim heading a design team or building a design team for a Swiss bank that wanted to kind of move into fintech, build a challenger bank to the classics and 26, Revolut, and so on, because they were obviously like eating into their business. And now I'm at Moonfare, and Moonfare is still a fintech company.
very niche
different
part.
segment.
Yeah, very niche part of fintech, of course. Yeah.
Correct. So yeah, private equity investments, pretty much trying to make private markets more accessible to the public. I mean, still our segment or our customers are mostly high net worth individuals. Not to say rich people.
I think disrupting a multi-billion euro industry is very difficult to make it accessible to everyday people, let's say. But I know obviously the investments have drastically reduced from what they typically are in the industry. So look, obviously thanks very much for the summary. Of course, I know we've been working together for a little bit as well, which is where the relationship comes from, which is always good. But yeah, I think the reason why I wanted to grab you for this podcast, Alex, was because obviously fintech is a booming industry. I think it's a booming industry globally right now. I think there's many different, even the poorer parts of the world, fintech is starting to build up there and starting to improve the general financial situation in a lot of different areas right now. I think I know traditional banking and traditional finance companies digitizing, the digital era of those, in the digital era of this industry has proven highly successful. Obviously, a lot of, as you mentioned, N26 and Revolut, I think some of them are actually worth more than all of the traditional banks put together these days. But yeah, obviously design within fintech, that's the main reason why we wanted to speak about it, because obviously digitizing a very traditional industry, I think design as a concept is a new thing, certainly in a lot of the more traditional financial areas. So just generically, really, what do you believe the current state of design within fintech is right now?
There has definitely been a lot of progress, and you've mentioned it. Or I mean, we already heard a couple of names, right? I think those neobanks are probably the first one that comes to someone's mind, and we've also seen them develop a lot from being really just only a credit card that someone would issue to you, so that you kind of have this digital wallet, to now those players like really going into banking licenses, offering a very broad spectrum from investments, everything also into more alternative assets, cryptocurrencies, these sort of things. Insurances being offered as part of their product. So definitely there has been a lot of movement. And also if we look at finances or the financial sector in general, right? I mean, it's everywhere. It's from the way you go into a shop and pay for the things you buy, the way you get your salary, you need to think of saving, investing. I mean, money is such a crucial part for us. And historically, especially with traditional banks, it has been very complicated. And I think the goal of fintechs is generally to simplify a lot of this, making things more accessible. You also mentioned emerging markets, right? I mean, we're looking at countries where opening a bank account is not something everyone can do. Not everyone can just walk into a bank, but everyone kind of has access to a smartphone and to internet, or most people have. And I think this is like really where fintechs come in, and where fintechs have also disrupted a lot over the last couple of years. And I think it's only going to grow, right? And big banks, if we think of like also the work that I've been doing in consulting, big banks are afraid of those new players.
100%.
They move way faster. They find smart ways around also regulatories and more tricky topics where the traditional banks just cannot keep up the pace. And I think that's where we're currently at a really good place, I would say.
No, I completely agree. I think a lot of the newer fintech businesses have a very first principle approach to their business models, to their approach, their approach to overcoming, as you said, regulatory issues and legal issues and things like that, where the traditional banks have had such structured ways of working previously. I think it's much more difficult for them to make changes or implement changes. I think that's across design, engineering, everything like that. a lot of the people I speak to, I worked in engineering recruitment before, and a lot of people that worked at traditional banks or traditional companies, let's say, across Germany and across other countries, always said that processes were generally very slow and trying to implement change was very, very difficult. Whereas obviously in the newer businesses where there's not legacy systems, for instance, or there's not tons and tons of things that they, tons of levels of management that they have to go through to do this, it's obviously been revolutionary for sure. In terms of fintechs and apps and products, I wanted to ask you your personal opinion. What do you believe? Maybe a handful, doesn't have to be one particular one, but I know we've mentioned a few already. What do you believe the best fintech applications or products are on the market currently? I'd say across Europe.
Yeah. I mean, I think both Revolut and N26 are like really strong players. I would definitely also mention companies like TransferWise, or now called Wise. More in the segment of like, okay, international payments and these sort of things. Nowadays, you also have a lot of companies moving into the B2B space, right? So is it Plio? Is it Quanto in France? I would say they are all like doing a really, really good job. Similar space. You would also have things like Moss. I think they're US based probably. But yeah, those are kind of the first few that come to my mind, and then it goes more into kind of niche markets. Probably I would also put PayPal in there, and I mean PayPal has been around for quite some time, but they're still massive players, right?
massively used. Yeah, they're certainly one company that haven't disappeared for sure. Amidst the numerous other of various other payment methods, i.e. Klarna and other players like that have come into the similar markets. Talking about Klarna, interesting enough, it just come into my head. Obviously you're fully aware of the situation there, and obviously at other companies right now too, unfortunately having to lay off staff right now. I mean, I've read articles about it. There's mixed opinions on why this is happening right now. It's a little bit steering off topic, but I think it's a relevant topic, obviously a hot topic right now, which Absolutely. I think a lot of people would want to hear opinions on. What do you believe is happening right now in terms of financial situation, possible recessions being talked about, obviously?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that there is definitely like a lot of different ideas. I mean, you have like from very pessimistic, okay, we're probably entering a recession that's going to last at least a couple of years, to people being a little bit more optimistic. I think one thing that we've definitely seen is that, especially from an investor's perspective, they all want to go for stability, right? And we're talking about, I mean, working in the private equity space and venture capital space and so on. It's those who give the money to the companies, or who gave traditionally the money to the companies to grow, that now want to see stability, that want to see revenue and so on. And I think this is where we can now see a lot of layoffs, right? Because historically, everyone was going straight for growth, right? Throwing a lot of money, especially at marketing, to grow a customer base. And not all of them with a very strong business model behind that, after the growth, actually gives you constant revenue. And I think it's just like where now companies need to switch a little bit, and there will probably be less investments also in the future for pure growth. And that's where now companies are talking about cash conservation. They're talking about like, okay, how can we actually extend our run rate and reduce actually the marketing spendings and our customer acquisition growth. And I mean, it's probably we will get more news like the ones from Klarna, Gorillas, Netflixes, and so on in the next couple of weeks and months.
I agree. Yeah, I think as you mentioned, growth is also obviously a big push for increasing users and things like that, but also growth from a personnel perspective. Hiring quite quickly and obviously quite rapidly.
Yeah.
I know we're going to delve deeper into that into the next topic, but yeah, I think companies that grow rapidly, maybe not for the right reasons, maybe because they think that's the way they're going to maybe achieve more users, or that's the best thing to do. Unfortunately, that obviously leads to especially new starters and people that joined the business recently. I know a lot of the people that I've seen on LinkedIn specifically were new starters or hadn't been there necessarily that long. That's unfortunately the first people that have to be laid off at that point. But yeah, I mean that's another topic in itself that we could talk about forever. But yeah, so back to our original topic essentially. Why do you believe it's so important in fintech, or generally, but mainly in fintech, to have a big focus on creating a seamless user experience, or having a big focus on really understanding what the users want, as opposed to maybe basing decisions off assumptions or basing decisions off purely competitor analysis or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it has a little bit to do with the fact that, first of all those financial topics have been very complicated, right? And if you want to broaden the access, if you want to get it to more people, if you want to especially target like younger generations, which most, especially the neobanks, that then you need to simplify those things, right? You need to make sure that you find an easy way that you to one extent also remove the friction of lengthy processes, signups, and so on. And I think the user experience has pretty much been the one and only driver for growth for a lot of these companies. First of all, smarter ways of like growth in terms of user base. How do I refer people? Having like some programs behind it that make it very interesting, especially to younger people. And then making sure that also the products itself are easy to use. And if you look at it, I mean, it starts with simple things like authentications, right?
Yeah.
Because of the industry that I'm working in, I have probably 20, 30 different bank accounts, and I went through all of them, from traditional banks to the small ones. Well, the amount of letters that you receive and the amount of time that you need to wait for to get one of these traditional bank accounts opened is just like crazy. And that's especially people who are used to the digital tools, who spend a lot of time on their phones and that are used to good experiences, that are actually focused on them and don't think so much about like the complexity that the business has to handle behind it. That's why design and user experience is so important in this field. And I think we're also talking about money, which is a topic that to some extent is scary. Like security is a really big topic. You need to trust the companies. I mean, at Moonfare, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of euros that someone needs to send us.
Exactly.
I mean, it's so to some extent there's like, okay, you need to make it simple, fast, easy to use, remove the friction. But at the same time, also, it's very important from a UX perspective to sometimes introduce friction that also creates this safety, that gives you the feeling of like, okay, I understand what is happening. I'm not losing anything. This is I'm doing the right thing, and I'm being also guided through a process, right? Because we're also removing a lot the human aspect out of it, right? I go to a physical bank and talk to someone that explains it to me. Now I need to understand it on my own through simple messaging, through simple images, through a clear flow that's not overwhelming and so on. And I think this is like really something that you can only achieve by actually like observing, seeing the people, how they use it, talking to the people, and then understand where the traditional system is also failing them, and to then tackle it and find new innovative ways to actually improve this.
I think yeah, as you mentioned, trying to make it simple and easy to use is important, but also it's money, right? And everyone wants their money to be secure. And generally, there's lots of rules, regulations. As a younger generation, we won't understand. Or if you don't work in banking, or if you don't work in finance, you won't necessarily understand. If you hadn't had that experience before, you buy a traditional bank, you might get sent 4 pages of terms and conditions that you literally have no idea what any of it means, right? But in the more modern day apps and things like that, they might still have to go through those procedures, but it's a lot more understandable. It's broken down a lot more for us to understand and to be able to interact with the applications much easier. How important do you think discovery is in fintech, in really getting to understand these? Because I've had, I obviously speak to designers every day, and I speak to product managers every day. It's what I do as a recruitment consultant. But discovery is a huge. It's obviously a concept. It's a huge part of designers' processes, product managers' processes. A lot of people I speak to say that unfortunately their company doesn't have a big focus on it. It doesn't allow them as an individual or as a team to have too much focus on it. It's much more, I think what holds them back potentially is budget. Sometimes I think time frames is obviously things that hold people back. You have to deliver something pretty quickly, depending on what industry you're in. There's not always enough time to do it. But yeah, I think I just wanted to ask you the question really, Alex. How important do you think the discovery phase, the discovery part of the whole process is?
Yeah. I mean, I think every designer would confirm, right? Discovery is very important, independently if you work in fintech or if you work in another business.
Yeah.
I think one thing that might be true, and that might be also the reason of why people say, okay, not enough discovery is happening and so on, is that because we are in a very mature stage for fintechs, there is also a lot of products around. And I think this is something where it's simply becoming very easy to copy certain things, or to have seen something, or to have a feeling or an understanding of what is a good user experience, right? Okay, it needs to be a guided onboarding process. You need to have certain functionality. And this is something that a lot of companies do wrong, unfortunately, which is like, okay, this classic, okay, do a benchmark. I look at all the different features and they try to close feature gaps in order to be able to compete with everyone. And then you lose focus. If like all the fintechs that have become big, they all started with one very specific user need. And to find that user needs, you usually need to do discovery. You need to you need to understand your users. You need to know what they do, what drives them, and what their pain points are. It's not as simple, okay, copying something that's already there will probably not give you competitive advantage. Could be that you can decrease fees or something because you're a big player, because you're a big bank. But this is also why a lot of traditional banks don't manage to compete with the fintechs, because they are lacking these processes. They maybe hire an agency to execute on these bucket lists of things that are missing from the product, or they simply are not flexible enough to have more agile, lean processes implemented in the organization. And that's why they fail. And I think the successful fintechs do spend time on discovery. They do spend time to like really identify these pain points and to improve them. And I think as designers, and not only designers, right? It's like the designers, the product managers, the engineers. It's extremely important to stay close to the customers and to do discovery constantly.
Yeah, definitely. I think assumption is a big part of certainly companies who don't necessarily have the right focus on discovery. I think obviously copying competitors is a big thing. Competitor analysis, it's obviously got to be done, right? It's part of the discovery process, right? It's part of understanding what your competitors are doing and how, but it's not about, oh, well, they're doing this, so we're going to do it. It's more about, well, they're doing this, so how can we better that essentially? How can we do something that's different but will be better than what they're already offering? And that's how you differentiate from themselves from there. But I hear a lot about assumption. The company, or from the top, they go, this isn't working. we assume that it's because of this, so let's go build this new feature and it should work. And realistically, they waste so much more time doing that rather than just doing the discovery first and then doing it, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly the moment where actually discovery should then kick in to be like, okay, I unvalidate these ideas, or I validate them, right? But I think it's like always down to making sure. And I think it's like also when someone, especially far up in the organizational hierarchy, comes up with an idea, it's not that necessarily will be a bad idea, not at all. But I think it's like really around like understanding, okay, maybe even before implementing that idea, what is it trying to solve? And how can we potentially solve it even better without falling into this solution trap of just building things? Because once they are also built, a lot of companies have this big problem that they're not able to throw things away. So they build it, it's on the app, you need to maintain it, there is a lot of maintenance that goes in, and you end up having even less time to be like to innovate.
To solve the original issue as well. I completely agree. I think it's a big problem across a lot of companies, their approach to the discovery phase. And I think, as we've established, the best companies out there have the best approach. They had one specific user need at the start, and they've built upon that, really got to understand their user base and what their users want. If they venture into different markets, they do the same thing. Because let's say Revolut, for instance, they've emerged into various different markets in different locations, and certainly different locations that maybe haven't had access to digital banking before are going to react completely differently to the user experience than we might from having previous digital experience before. How do you think? I know obviously when you joined SumUp, it was a few years ago now. That was your first real fintech role. Am I right in saying, where you had your first experience in fintech? But how do you think it's changed since then? When you first walked through those doors at SumUp, got to understand the market, got to understand the financial sector, the fintech experience. How do you think user experience as a whole has changed since then?
I would say that there is definitely more awareness of the whole topic and of the importance of user experience. And you can also see this in the hiring and in the way the market changed when it comes to this massive need of designers and a ton of open roles and a ton of like recruiters constantly trying to get talent from different companies. I mean, I think while probably compared to some other industries, and I've heard like in some previous talks, you also talked about, okay, it was only about aesthetics at the beginning, and then we moved more and more into product and user experience. I think user experience was definitely here, but still the maturity also of design teams and the willingness to invest in design teams, especially in Europe, that changed a lot. I mean, I think in the US, they're usually a little bit more ahead of us.
Generally,
to like, okay, having really designers, different skill sets, sitting within the different engineering teams. This wasn't something that I've seen right away, right? We usually had like a user experience team, and it was a way more waterfall-y approach of like, okay, getting some topics, designing them, trying to make them both look prettier and work better, with some research involved. But I think now it's like really shifting into, okay, you need to have at least one product designer. If there's a product manager, you need to kind of give them the ownership. They need to have access to data, to users, and so on. So I think the biggest change is also this willingness to invest and the fear of the competitors and the competitive advantage that you can get or might lose based on your user experience. And I think that's obviously for designers a really good development.
For sure. I think we've seen it rocket. Certainly, I'd even say probably since the start of the pandemic, to be honest. I think because so many things were shifted to digital, because of the pandemic, because people weren't able to go to physical shops, physical banks or whatever it might be, there were so many new companies, new startups, existing startups doing different things, digitizing different process they might already have. And that saw a real shift in the need for, we need product designers now. So many companies decided, we probably need to start investing and start looking into hiring product designers. And there was a crazy shift. And I think the market's absolutely crazy right now. Certainly for senior designers. I spoke on the last podcast I did with Piotr Tomaszewski from Contentful. We spoke about the senior market as it is right now. And generally a lot of companies are, we want a senior designer, we want someone who can hit the ground running, etc., etc. Which means that the senior pool now has obviously become massively massively fluctuated, and means that most senior designers know that they can now look for higher salaries and things like that, which makes it a pain for everyone.
Yes.
But cool. Well, look, I think we covered off quite a lot in that particular topic there within fintech, certainly. But I wanted to change the scope of our conversation now more towards design teams in general. Now, obviously, you've built design teams previously before joining Moonfare. You built obviously a large design team at SumUp, of course, and you're currently building a design team at Moonfare now. So I just wanted to ask you first and foremost, when you're given the task of, you go into a business and they say, right, we want to build a new design team, or we want to give you the task of building a design team. What are the key fundamentals of doing that, and where do you essentially start from?
That's a fun question, and it also depends a little bit like on the stage that the company is in and that the team is in, right?
Yeah.
I'm now like comparing also directly my experience at SumUp, where I mean the company was growing very fast and a lot. Not sure we can talk about hyper growth there, but definitely we did double in size multiple times each year. But at least there it was like the whole company also started growing, right? So the design team grew with the company. Now with Moonfare, it's a slightly different experience because there was a very small design team, a lot of like work that happened also for freelancers, nobody who would really own it in the past. And so it's more around integrating a design team in already an existing organization that has a certain scale. And I think the two things are different, but the fundamental thing is always to understand the needs and the organization, right? What are the teams that are there? What are the features that are being worked on? What are the main challenges that the company is currently facing? What are the business goals? Where do we need to have the right people? And then like really also identifying, okay, what are the skills that we need for all these different places, right? Do I need some specialized designers on certain areas? Like, do I need a special visual UI designer who can like really take the visuals to a next level? Do I need more broader product designers? Do I need someone who can work on service design? What are the research needs? Do I need a separate research team? And so on and so forth. And I think that's like really where then it comes down to trying to identify all the different needs, obviously budgeting for them and getting everything approved, especially with the current senior market. That's where you usually need some back and forth, and then starting to talk to people. And I think especially now with Moonfare, right, where just to also put it in context, I joined the company last year in March, so it's a little bit over a year now. And there was one designer when I joined.
Bianca, right?
And now we are correct. And now we are at 16 people in the design organization. Right, I mean, it's product designers, it's brand designers, it's researchers, we even have video editors. But obviously, it's like 16 people that all joined pretty much at the same time.
Yeah.
So what you also need to do is, like, as you start adding people to the organization, you need to identify, okay, what are now the missing skills, or what are the skills that we have where we need to then put someone in so that they can pair up and extend each other. So it's definitely also something where it needs a little bit like of resilience, because you have to change a lot, or you have to constantly kind of reanalyze, okay, where do we stand now with the team? Is the budget actually still accurate? Am I looking for the right people? Do I need to change the profiles for the people based on what we already have in the organization, to also make sure that you hire for a certain diversity, both in skills as well as like the culture and the thinking that the different people bring to the table, and then adjust here and there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously from from my experience working with you, Alex, I know there's been various situations where, you know, the need to my pain, obviously, but I know, no, obviously for all the right reasons, of course, as you explained. I think it's not the vision and what you need changes drastically. You know, the more people you add, the more skills you obtain, but then there might be different areas that are missing that you need to adapt. And I think it's certainly massively important to realize that and not just stick to one particular plan and say this was the original plan, we're going to stick with it, and because it massively changes depending on the people that you're able to bring in, for sure. I know you mentioned hypergrowth a little bit there. We're not going to go into too much about hypergrowth necessarily, but obviously, as you explained, you know, you grew massively across the team there. Obviously, Moonfare's team has grown massively since you've been there. Quality over quantity is a hot topic for sure. I think, as I was talking to you before that we jumped on the podcast I did with Guilherme, we spoke about this in quite depth about the hypergrowth phase, whether quality was sacrificed for quantity due to demands for growth. Have you witnessed this? Have you experienced it? Or I know certainly at Moonfare, certainly from my relationship with you, I know it's not the case. But have you seen it yourself? Have you seen it elsewhere?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a little bit, it's a trap, right? Like, because you really need someone. You have a lot of things that you need to deliver on. You have a lot of deadlines, stakeholders who put pressure on you. So I think it's easy to react to this and be like, okay, I need human resources. I need people who can get the work done. But I think that's usually a big mistake, right? Because if you hire the wrong people, it takes more time to, well, get them up to speed, or to support them, or to give them feedback, or to give them the right feedback. And I think the worst thing that can happen is you hire the wrong person for the job, you onboard them for a couple of months, you've waited for a couple of months until they
especially in Germany.
Join. Exactly. I mean, we're usually looking at these 3 months of notice period,
at
right?
least.
It could be 4 months until they join, and then you have a couple of months until you figure out, okay, it's actually not the right person. Usually firing people or letting go people is something that you anyway always do way too late. So you burn a lot of time, and then you're starting from scratch again, because you need to go through this whole recruiting process, which takes time, and there's again notice periods. So I think it's always better to make sure to have a hiring process that gives you a certain confidence that it is the right person for the role, and that also gives the person itself the right confidence that you're the right team. And I mean, it happened last week. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I mean, she's looking currently for a job, and she interviewed at a company, and in the first call they told her, oh yeah, you have the job, you can start next week. And she's like, okay, I'm totally not sure if that's what I want. Now I have this job on paper, they want me to decide this week, what should I do? And I mean, I think this is also something that's, I mean, you can see, right? That's like, it needs to be fast. It's more about this quality aspect. I need to get people on board. But at the end, it could also be that then for the person, it turns out it's the wrong fit of they don't like the company. So I don't see a lot of benefit into pushing people into a role that then might not be the right one, because at the end it's just like very costly to have to replace someone.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in your scenario with your friend, I think it works both ways, doesn't it, really? I think if a company can decide on someone that quickly after one call, I question how well they've actually screened this person. But I think, me personally, I wouldn't join a company after one interview, because you haven't had a chance to really understand them, and you haven't had a chance to meet everyone that you want to meet, and really, moving job is a massive life decision. And I think some companies don't necessarily realize that is the case. They expect, just because you've had a good conversation, then that's it, that you should want to join us. I think there's also, I wanted to ask your opinion on this as well, is in today's market, certainly, how much selling as a company do you think you have to do now, in comparison to maybe back when at SumUp, let's say, because of how competitive the market is now? I spoke with another client of mine recently, and they were saying the same thing. They were saying it's not necessarily a case of screening these people for us. It's more, how much selling do we have to do to this person, depending on how good they are. Essentially, if they find someone really good, it's maybe even adjusting the process for them, because if they find someone really good, but they might have competitive offers, it's maybe we're saying, well, we don't really need to do this particular element. I don't see the value necessarily of doing this with this particular person, but we need to sell here. We need to sell ourselves. What we can do for them. I think, in my opinion, the market's completely flipped. It's no longer necessarily about candidates or people going for jobs trying to sell themselves to the company. It's more the company selling to them. But what's your viewpoint on that at the moment?
I would agree on things like adjusting the process and looking more at the needs also of the different candidates, because definitely, like, if you lose them for good. The market is way too competitive. But when it comes to the selling specifically, I think the biggest fear I have with like trying to sell a role is like to oversell it and to then have someone who joins and who signs up for something that they initially didn't sign up for, right?
That is not exactly what they thought.
Completely other. And I think that's again back to the conversation we had earlier. It's quite costly to then lose someone in the process. But nevertheless, I think of course it's important to show people that there is, like, to give them the arguments of why they should join your company. And I think the best arguments usually are the product itself, right? Is it an interesting product? Secondly, the team itself. Do you have a strong team? Do you have quality people? That helps you attract more talent and more quality people in the conversations. What is the culture of the company? And I think if those few things are all there, and you sell them or you explain them the right way, that's the best thing that you can do. And I think it's also, I obviously choose the company that I work for also based on those principles, right? Because if the team's processes or the product or the culture and so on isn't the right one, you won't be able to hire people. And that would suck.
Definitely.
So I think it's a little bit a mix of creating the right environment so that people want to join. Sell the reality, but don't oversell.
Definitely. I think it's massively about, obviously, certainly my position, but I think also from a company's perspective, is understanding the individual's motivations as much as possible. As we said, it's not. I think some companies have this perception of the interview process is just them sort of like interrogating this person to make sure that they're the right person for them. But even when selling, even in better companies that understand that they need to create good culture, have a good product and have a good opportunity for the person, but the end of the day, you might be selling to the wrong person at the end of it. Because if you don't get to the grips of what motivates this person, what they're interested in, and things like that, you might have the best opportunity in the world, in your opinion. But to them, it might be totally wrong. But yeah, I think it's obviously that's why the interview process is there, to get to know them and to get to understand them. Next question I wanted to ask you, Alex, was, and I know I've said this before to you as well, that we've had this conversation a few times, but I always get really interested to hear your thoughts on, what do you look for in designers specifically? So it could be, obviously we've talked about portfolios before, what you want to see from their work on portfolio. But outside of that as well, it's obviously not just a portfolio, you're hiring a person, not just the work that they do. So what are the key, again, fundamentals of what you look for in a designer that you'd want to hire for your team?
Yeah. The first thing that you see is obviously always the portfolio.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's like really, there's not so much emotion in looking at a portfolio. You look at the basic skills, right? Do they understand the fundamental design principles? Do they have like some understanding visually? Really, the first thing that you see is like the visual design.
Generally expect a designer to have good visual design.
Yeah. And I think past that step, you can look at, okay, what is actually the user experience or the product that they worked on. And I think then it really becomes interesting to understand, okay, how much of the whole product and the strategy and the features that are there have been like, where have they been involved? Have they just like been executing on a design request, or have they really been part of the process, right? I think especially with product designers, this like really being part of this whole process, having a good understanding about the business itself, being able to talk about the business, that is definitely one of the things that I usually look for, right? Because at the end, you need to work with your stakeholders, you need to be able to explain them the ideas, you need to meet them on kind of their level, and that's usually coming from a business perspective. So I think like being able to communicate these things clearly, to have this understanding, that's like one of the core things, along with visual and general like process skills that I would be looking for. But I think beyond that, culture is also more and more important, right? You want to have people who are generally curious, who do their work not only because of the financial motivation that some might maybe have in today's markets. You want to have people who are excited about actually creating good work, having an impact, and pushing a product onto the next level. And I think what's also important is to kind of look at, okay, where are they coming from and where do they want to go to? Because more than just more than using that to decide, okay, is it a good designer or not? It's like really also to figure out, do I have the right role for him? And unfortunately, we had to also reject some really good candidates simply because I don't think they would have long-term fit the team, because there's people already in the team. You need to think of like, how do you give them growth? How are you able to promote or move them in order to keep them also excited, and to give them a certain level of career growth also. And therefore, every single person that you need to add also needs to fit into those existing structures. So it's not only about like there can be massive people that are just not the right fit for this one specific role, and then you need to pass on them. And I think that's maybe also something like for candidates to keep in mind. That's not always just down to the skills, the culture, the way they communicate in the interview. But I think as managers, it's also really our role to make sure that we hire people into a role that keeps them happy. And if we feel like we can't do that, then they probably they need to find something better somewhere else.
I think that leads us very nicely into the last question I wanted to ask you. Was obviously, once you've built your design team, you've got people into the team. As we've established, the market is so competitive right now. They probably have tens of others of recruiters like myself hounding their LinkedIn inboxes and emails to try and sway them away from your business. How do you go about? I know you mentioned in that last point you made about finding where they fit into the team, providing career growth and things like that. But how do you keep or retain your staff once you've hired them?
So generally, the one and most important thing is to really try to invest as much time as possible to understand what they want, what they need, what their kind of end goal is for the career, like even long-term end goal, like where do they want to move into? Do they want to stay in design? Do they want to move in something completely different? Do they want to found their own company and so on? And then making the best out of the time that they're with you, right? And I think the best thing to do that is by supporting them with their steps and their career and their future. And it could be that maybe that doesn't mean that they need to stay with you forever. Or maybe they shift into a different role. Maybe they move into product. Maybe they move into operations. I don't know, right? But it really starts with having an open mind, try to understand where they are, what drives them, what motivates them, and where they want to go. Try to identify their areas where they can grow, where they are currently not performing. Also being transparent around that. Sometimes it's not super clear. And I think feedback is also extremely important. And then try to also give them a plan on how to achieve certain things, right? Career development plans. And it is hard. It's really,
definitely.
It also means a lot of work of individually understanding the different people. And sometimes you're just extremely busy. So you might not invest all the time that you should in, for example, one-on-ones or staying close to the team, or you use the time in a wrong way because you're way too focused on maybe some urgent topics like a specific project. But I think to keep people happy, it's really just to also personally get to know them and try to then navigate them around the team, try to find the right opportunities. Could be inside the job or could be outside the job. Sometimes even giving someone the opportunity to talk at some conferences or to share something outside or to run one of the all hands presentations and so on. Sometimes even these small things are already good opportunities to give them growth opportunities. And as long as you can constantly give them that, I think you will also have a lot of people that are happier, right? And it also goes all the way to the opposite of, you might have people that don't necessarily want to constantly change role or to be promoted or to manage people. And I think there it's also important that for those people, you have the right plans in place so that they can they can still kind of get their promotions in terms of the higher salary, so that you don't just create one path that's true for all. I think that's where and most companies do this right nowadays. I think 5 years ago or before that it was quite different. But also having this individual contributor versus manager track to allow people to then shift between it, experiment, and see, do I want to become an expert somewhere or do I want to manage people? So I think, it's really down to there's a lot that goes into it.
For sure.
You need to have a career plan. You need to stay close to the people. You need to work with them.
I think one key point you made there as well is certainly what I picked up on was the outside effects of the job or what they want to achieve. Sometimes it's not just they want to achieve this in their role. It might be something they want to achieve outside of the job, or it might be something that they achieve within the job that leads to what they want to achieve outside. I think a common term we use in recruitment is trying to find the reasons behind the reasons, and there is always reasons behind. If someone wants to become a leader, or get a salary increase, what does that mean for you outside of work? What does that allow you to achieve? Does it allow you to achieve move house or get a car, or whatever it might be? People want different things with their money and have different motivations. But I think a common mistake people make is that they just might focus on what they want to achieve in their job, and that without understanding what the outside reasons might be, and that might lead to them not being able to truly fulfill what they're looking for, essentially. But yeah, look, Alex, I think we'll end it there. But it was an absolute pleasure. I think this will be a great listen for anyone who's going to tune in for sure. It's also available on Spotify for anyone watching too. So we have shifted to Spotify, or of course you can still listen to it on YouTube where it was before. Yeah, look, Alex, really appreciate your time again. Thanks very much, man.
Matt, thanks a lot. It was great to be here, and we stay in touch.